a casual look around and you will know. America has an obesity epidemic. Obesity is a medical condition characterized not only by excessive weight, but by excessive fat accumulation in the body. Obesity rates are increasing worldwide, but the United States is the leader in obesity amongst developed nations. According to the Journal of American Medicine, 2/3 of American adults are overweight and nearly 35% are obese. The obesity rate amongst American children is now 17%. Minorities are disproportionately affected, as they are 20 to 50% more likely to be obese, particularly if they are women. Obesity is a serious health issue because it is strongly associated with heart disease, high blood pressure, diabetes, and even cancer. The Centers for Disease Control, or CDC, lists these conditions as some of the leading causes of preventable deaths. It is also associated with acid reflux, sleep apnea, and even dementia. Obesity is truly a national crisis, but it hasn't always been this way. In 1965, 1/3 of Americans were overweight, and less than 1/10 were obese. These numbers have only increased, as displayed in this chart. Today, 2/3 of Americans are overweight, and more than 1/3 are obese. In the past several decades, obesity has increased exponentially. It is predicted that by 2035, 95% of all adults will be overweight or obese. These are staggering numbers. How did this happen? How did it get this bad? What causes obesity in the first place? The answer is a complex one. Most people would say that it's just because we don't exercise nearly as much as we used to 50 years ago. This is certainly true. With all of our TVs, computers, iPhones, and video games, we definitely have a habit of sitting. We just aren't burning as many calories as we used to. But how is it that every other developed country also has TVs, computers, iPhones, and video games, just like us, but they aren't as obese as us? Why is this? The answer could lie in our diet. In 1980, the American government, the USDA, issued the first dietary guidelines for Americans. It constructed a food pyramid to guide us. The pyramid suggested that we eat large amounts of carbohydrates such as grains and potatoes, small amounts of protein, and very little fat. The idea that fat is unhealthy was based on one flawed study by Dr. Ansel Keys. This one study was pushed and promoted more than other studies that found that sugar was more harmful. People made the assumption that eating fat makes you fat, and that sugar is relatively harmless. This idea has become deeply ingrained in American medicine and became accepted as truth, despite many studies indicating otherwise. The food market became flooded with cheap processed foods that are low in fat but high in carbohydrate. As long as they were labeled diet or fat-free, they were considered healthy, even if they were highly processed with little nutrient value. Without fat, food tasted bland, so the manufacturers compensated by adding more sugar. Since Americans began following the USDA's advice on going low-fat, Americans' carb and sugar intake has greatly increased. Since then, the obesity has more than doubled, and type 2 diabetes has tripled. Physician and author Dr. Mark Hyman explains that starchy, simple carbs, such as white bread, white pasta, and potatoes, are very quickly converted into sugar by the body. Sugar triggers the release of insulin, a hormone that blocks the hormone leptin that tells us when we are full. Insulin also signals the body to store the sugar as fat. In contrast, when we eat protein and fiber, our insulin isn't raised as much, and our food is digested more slowly, helping us feel fuller longer. Pediatric endocrinologist Dr. Robert Lustig explains how sugar can become addictive. Like a drug, sugar activates the pleasure centers of the brain, giving a high as our blood sugar spikes. Later, when our blood sugar crashes, we crave even more carbs. We end up riding a blood sugar roller coaster. When carbs are balanced with protein and fiber, however, blood sugar remains much more stable, and we feel more satisfied without the cravings. As the idea that sugar is the root of the obesity crisis gains support and recognition around the world, some European countries have begun to place taxes on sugary sodas, sweets, and junk food. The idea of taxing these things the way alcohol and tobacco are taxed has been controversial. In America, where people are learning more about the dangers of sugary drinks, soda consumption has gone down. So soda manufacturers have reacted by diversifying into other beverages such as iced tea and spring water. Nearly 100 years ago, obesity was rare. It was considered a rich man's disease. Only the rich people could afford to eat a lot. But today, this is not the case. Obesity is increasingly a disease of poverty, with our poorest states being the most obese. Why are the poor disproportionately affected? Many of our nation's poor live in what's known as food deserts, where there aren't any large grocery stores within miles. It is difficult to access fruits, vegetables, and fresh meat. The choices are either to eat fast food or junk food from the convenience store. These addictive foods are very dense in calories and carbs, but are devoid of fiber and lack many nutrients. So the body stores fat, but never gets the nutrients it needs. This is why Americans, particularly our poor, are increasingly overfed and undernourished. Obesity and malnutrition often go hand in hand. The standard American diet, or SAD diet, contains very little fiber and a lot of processed food with long lists of ingredients that are unpronounceable. Nutritionists are now calling these ingredients obesogens because they disrupt our metabolism. Trainer Jillian Michaels argues that maintaining a healthy weight is much easier if we eat whole foods, which are foods in their natural state. Health experts of all kinds agree that this is the most direct way to optimal health. For those without access to whole foods from a grocery store, farmers markets are becoming more popular in urban areas, and many are accepting food stamps as a method of payment. Urban farms and community gardens are also becoming more common and can serve as an oasis in a food desert. In America, where we are used to having several restaurants on every block, preventing obesity means cooking more of our own food at home. Dr. Hyman argues that we have given up our kitchens and our taste buds to the food industry, and that we have no choice but to cook our way out of our obesity crisis. Asian countries in particular, where obesity rates are very low, place high value on eating at home and making their own food from scratch. Celebrity chef Jamie Oliver, who was alarmed at the epidemic of obesity in the U.S. as well as his native England, launched his Food Revolution campaign to educate others on the lost art of cooking. The sooner we relearn the art of cooking, the healthier we'll be as a nation. How can you help solve our obesity crisis? Here are just a few ways. Number 1, lead by example. Make a commitment towards your own health. Don't go crazy on carbs, but balance them out with protein, fiber, and some good fat. Eat as many fruits and vegetables as you can, and try to replace junk food with foods that have only one ingredient. Number 2, write or email your local school district to bring back cooking instructions in schools so that young people graduate from high school knowing how to create healthy food. Number 3, write or email grocery store chains to encourage them to locate into our inner cities. Number 4, volunteer at an urban farm or a community garden. Or 5, donate to organizations that support them. There's a new documentary out about childhood obesity in the U.S. It is hosted by Katie Couric and is called Fed Up. It is now in theaters. Thanks to movies like these, the public can be educated, and we may finally make strides in reversing the obesity epidemic. Although eating the healthy diet, as opposed to the standard American diet, does take more time, it ends up saving time and money on doctor's visits, medications, medical procedures, etc. According to the CDC, an obese person can expect to spend $1,400 more per year for healthcare compared to a normal weight person. With greater education about food and greater access to it, Americans can be empowered to reverse our obesity epidemic once and for all.